listening back to this show from Teachers Talk Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight on this Teachers Talk Radio special, in which I'm joined by Dr. David Preece, who is going to be talking about his fantastic new book called Secondary Geography in Action that was published in October 2025. Now, thank you for joining us, David. It's great to have you with us.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me on.
And David is Head of Geography for Teach First, leading on curriculum and teacher development in initial teacher education in geography across England. A former secondary teacher and head of department, he taught in South East London for over a decade. He read geography at the University of Oxford before studying for a PhD in climate change at University College London and an MA in education while teaching. He is passionate about the power of bringing teachers together and has volunteered and worked with a number of subject and specialist associations, together with serving as a climate ambassador supporting schools. And his book, Secondary Geography in Action, published by Hachette Learning, is a guide really to interpreting subject-specific educational research in real-world classrooms and transforming students into effective, enthusiastic geographers. It's a comprehensive overview of geography teaching in action, and teachers will find plenty of ideas in it to strengthen, inspire, and develop their teaching practice in a practical and very enjoyable book to read. So, David, why did you write this book, and who do you think it's for in particular?
Well, I think the book sits as part of the In Action series from Tom Sherrington and the team at Hachette, which is all about, they started with a number of research papers being put into action, where you take, Dunlosky's toolkit, or you take Williams' formative assessment theory and think about how to translate that into the medium of real-world classroom practice for teachers. And after the phenomenal success of the kind of papers and theory side of the research paper in action series, they turned to try and create a lens for subject specialists. So this is part of a series of books. There's one for loads of secondary series that have been published and are still being published. And then the primary ones start coming out in September of this year onwards. So hopefully it'll be a really big library for everyone to kind of dip into on how do we translate the ideas, the thinking, the experience, the wisdom, how do we distill that into a practical guide that people can use in their classrooms?
And how do you hope new geography teachers and established geography teachers will use the book in practice, David, to help them develop their teaching?
Dylan William is world famous for a number of things, but I think at heart, he's a geographer, because he talks about this idea that everything works somewhere, nothing works everywhere. And to me, that is a fundamental expression of place. So if nothing works everywhere, then our job is to interrogate it, to find out what's the infrastructure, what's the stuff that underlies it, and how do I make that work for me in my classroom? So what I'm hoping people will do with this book is read the balance of research and what we've got, and ask questions of their own practice. I don't have the answers. I don't teach in your classroom, in your context, in your school. I haven't constructed your curriculum. But what I hope this offers is an insight into some of the discussions that people are having that prompts people to then use that, maybe as departmental CPD, maybe as a new leader, maybe as a new teacher, to prompt them to question and reflect on their own practice.
And if you look back over your career, David, do you have any particular thoughts around the need for such a book to concretise perhaps the knowledge and experience of geography in the secondary school?
I think the difficulty for that for me is that I have worked with some incredible people over my career, and I've learned so many brilliant things that I didn't know I was learning at the time. I learned how to tell stories, or I learned how to do field work, or I learned how to do some incredible adventures and challenge and awe and wonder. And I don't think I'd realized what I didn't know until long after that point, when I was reflecting on it and kind of writing the book and sitting down and thinking. And as I came out of the classroom and moved into initial teacher education, I think what became really clear to me was, first of all, the assumptions I'd made about my subject being the same as everyone else's subject just weren't true. And I needed, when I was thinking about my trainee teachers, to really get a grip of what is it that's different about geography, not just in the academic sense of what we teach, but the operational sense of how we teach it, how we structure it. What does it mean for us to be an option subject? What does it mean for us to have a 3, 5 or 7 year journey, and so on? And then I was struck by the extent to which so much of my geographical education and my teaching education was based on osmosis of tacit skills. I learned how to be a great form tutor by watching great form tutors. I never had a CPD or an inset session on it. I learned how to support candidates for university by working in that space. I didn't go on a course. And so I think what I really wanted to do with the book was to say, how do I make explicit some of the implicit? How do I bring those conversations alive? Not claiming that I have the answers, but asking the questions and saying, here's what some of the reading and the research says in these spaces.
Thank you. And you've already mentioned Dylan William, of course. Are you trying to present in your book a straightforward way of dealing with some of this more complex research? What kind of other authors were you researching as you were going about the process of making this book?
I mean, this is one of the things where I think the discipline of geography, as is taught at a secondary level, is in a wonderfully supported place. We have two very, very strong subject associations, the Geographical Association and the Royal Geographical Society, who do slightly different things in slightly different ways, but fundamentally provide a fabulous platform for resources, authors. Publications like Teaching Geography are sensational. The discipline of geography has been graced by some incredible writers and thinkers. Margaret Roberts is now in her 80s, but is still an absolute inspiration to us all. Her work on geography through inquiry has really shaped secondary geography in a hugely powerful way. Mark Enser, David Gardner have both done some incredible work on curriculum thinking. Mark, before, during, and after his time as an HMI subject lead, David at QCA and in a number of spaces. There are some incredible colleagues, Emma Rawlings-Smith, Vicky Pountney in the ITE space. There are some brilliant people. This is a book that is summarising and standing on the shoulders of absolute giants of our profession. And I'm really lucky to have been able to write it at a time when so much of our discipline has been reflected on and reviewed sort of in advance of the curriculum and assessment report, if you like. There was a lot of work on where are we at, what are we doing, what do we think this should be in preparation for submissions. And I was privileged to be part of some of those conversations. So I'm lucky to have been able to kind of do a state of the nation at the time I was doing it, if you like.
Yeah, and it's going to be very useful for readers, of course, to have that state of the nation in one single bound volume, because, of course, keeping up with things on the internet can be quite a challenge when you've got all of these different resources from all of these different sites and you're kind of authority checking the value of the research. And you've done most of that work for us. So that's all very good in terms of how you're putting across that connection between research and practice, I think. In your experience then, David, how is geography typically defined in the secondary school? And what issues arise when considering questions about curriculum design across 3 consecutive key stages?
You're going to hear me say this a lot over the course of this evening, perhaps, but it depends. Geography is a fundamentally constructed discipline at the school level. There are big building blocks that we all draw upon. There is the human geography about people and their place in the world. There is the physical geography of the process of the natural landscape and how that creates and defines features that we see. There are skills and fieldwork elements of investigating the world around us that shape who we are and how we view the world as geographers. And then there are the components of the kind of problems and challenges, things, you know, we've probably all done some decision making exercises about where should we build this new thing? Should we defend or manage this thing in this way? And whether that's contentious issues like, do we build a new third runway at Heathrow? Whether that's practical considerations of how do you rebuild coastal defences in our area, or whether that's, you know, the biggest challenges of our time in the climate crisis. Geography is loosely constructed from those big building blocks. But ultimately, at a secondary school, it is then very much defined by the local experience. There's a loose guidance from the national curriculum in terms of topics and themes, but those are illuminated by the stories you tell and the places you choose to exemplify and the case studies you draw upon. And of course, geography, like so many of the humanities and the creative subjects, it is dependent on the lived experience of the students who walk into our classrooms. They don't walk in as tabula rasa. They don't walk in with an idea of misconceptions or something. There is a right or there is a wrong. There is no one objective truth. I've taught students who, you know, I'm talking about a case study of urban management in Brazil, and I've had a student put his hand up and be like, "Sir, I lived there for 6 years. That's not what it's like." And you have to sit in that moment in that room and go, "Okay, you have the expertise. Tell me the stories. Tell me what it's really like." Or don't actually come back in the next lesson with some photos and tell the class what it's like. And I think, like you as an English teacher, like historians, like so many of us, we have to shape our curriculum to serve our context and the students and their lived experience that they bring to it. If you are a student in a coastal town, you might study coasts more than you would if you were in an inner city London school. If you grow up on the edge of the Peak District, you will study glaciation more than you would if you're in an inner city London school. And if you're in an inner city London school, you're probably going to look a little bit more about urban regeneration. And that's okay, right? School geography allows us to draw on the building blocks and tell the story that serves our students best.
That's an interesting point, actually, this sense of the localness of geography curriculum. How, in your experience then, do students respond to continuing their geography curriculum as they move out of particular localities around the country? Does that pose any particular problems?
Well, I think one of the underpinning disciplinary concepts of geography, and we haven't defined them as clearly as Christine Council's exceptional work in history and the second order tiers, but one of the critical things for geography is this idea of scale, of local, regional, national, international, global, playing that conversation. And I think you can construct a curriculum where you start local and build the scale up. So in year 7, you'll focus on your local geography in your local area. In year 8, you might go a bit bigger and you might look at national or regional problems. And then you might do the global stuff in year 9. You might do it the other way around. You might make a deliberate choice that what you want to do is expose students to contrasts and to other. So in the national curriculum, they deliberately focus on Africa as a unit of work, whatever that means to you. Russia, the Middle East, there are deliberate zones where you are asking students to compare and contrast and build their sense of self and versus other, their sense of home versus other cultures and other experiences, their sense of how those things interrelate and how those things interact. And so I think that's part of geography. Part of geography is figuring out what it is about the place that you occupy. What's the wonderful quote of, you know, the joy of travel is to experience the world and come home to the same place and find it different than when you left it. Like, that's the joy of what we try and do.
And in terms of the skills that you're expecting students to demonstrate in their geography curriculum, what kind of things should subject leaders and classroom teachers be mindful of when preparing a geography curriculum?
Well, I think we fundamentally want to recognise that geography offers people a lens by which they view and interpret and understand the world. So we need to be able to teach this concept of a critical eye on the world. What are we seeing? What does that tell us? What does it not tell us? What conclusions can we draw? How can we interpret that? We need to recognize that geography is an investigative discipline. Our heart, our disciplinary raison d'etre, if you like, is to go out into the world and understand more about it. And that means teaching field work explicitly, teaching the ability to interpret and understand a range of sources, maps, graphs, charts, diagrams, aerial imagery, satellite photographs, GIS. We have to be quite comfortable in both literate and numeracy skills and graphical skills to draw on a range of things. And then the core of geography is to reach into all of that and draw out the threads that matter. Why is that the most important thing here? Why is that the most important thing in this place, but not in that one? Why does that work for these people, but not for those? Come back to that Dylan William thing again. Why does it work somewhere, but not everywhere? So geography leaders need to think about not just what we're teaching, but also what we are exposing students to in terms of their way of thinking and the skills by which they interpret and understand it.
And how then does geography, which is a famously interdisciplinary subject, interact with other subjects in students' school lives, like business studies at the upper end of the school, biology perhaps throughout the school, economics and politics, say, when they move into Key Stage 5? How does it engage with all of those different important subject areas that can quite clearly have an effect on the way we see the world without being subsumed by them, do you think, David?
Well, I think it interacts with them really nicely and really interestingly. The best A-level classes you ever get to teach as a geography teacher are the ones where you've got a mix of the person who's an economist, the person who's a historian, the person studying politics, and the scientists, and you're grappling and you all sat around a table looking at an issue and bringing those lenses and perspectives. I think what geography offers to those spaces is the nature of going out and investigating in a way that perhaps some of those other subjects might not do. Biology, in the list that you mentioned, does, of course, but you don't tend to go and do field work as an economist. You might analyze data sets, but you're not going to go out and poke an economy and experiment with it and see what happens. So I think what secondary geography does is draws on that synopticity, that ability to tie concepts together, to think about the whole, think about how those parts interact, and think about evaluating the most important components of it. Of course, at tertiary level, geography as a discipline fragments a lot more. So you will have economic geographers, you will have people who specialize in political geography, you will have people who specialize in, biogeography and ecosystems and all kinds of things. And at university levels, one of the challenges sometimes for our students to grasp, Key Stage 3, 4, and 5 are structured very similar at secondary level, and they fragment very deeply at tertiary level. And sometimes students are like, "What? I can do an entire degree in human geography and never do any physical geography again." That can be very exciting or terrifying, depending on your mindset. So I think at secondary level, it's about that synopticity. It's about seeing the whole and drawing on those as experiences and valid perspectives and saying, what do we learn from that?
Yes, I mean, that's an interesting idea. The way the fragmentation of geography happens as you move into the tertiary environment. It's not mentioned in your book, but I wondered if you had any thoughts about how subject leaders and senior leaders in schools then effectively recruit department staff to make sure that they've either got a balance if they want a balance, or that they've got a very specific focus if they want a specific focus. What kinds of challenges are raised by that dilemma?
Well, I think it depends what school context you're working in as to how you solve that specifically. For most people, the answer is that you recruit someone with qualified teacher status who's had to teach across a broad range of the key stages and a broad range of the topics. And therefore, you can trust that at least they've had 1 year of a little bit of everything. But every single geography teacher will have their own makeup of skills they love, skills they're not so great at. They'll have topics that they love to teach, topics that they're not so great at. And as a senior leader or as a middle leader, if you're a head of department, you do what you do in any other aspect of human management, which is to build on the strengths of your team where you can and support the areas of growth that you need, and you look after the people that you've got. I think if you are waving a magic wand, you would ideally have a couple of human geographers, a couple of physical geographers, a couple of people who loved field work and adventure. Some of them might help out in other areas of the school, like D&V or expeditions. You could build a perfect portfolio if you had 8-10 geographers, but there are very few schools for whom that's the reality, I think. So you trust that everyone is in the same position and that you all work together and share the strengths and build on the areas for growth, I guess.
Yeah, and what about the challenge of these 1 or 2 people geography departments then that some schools will have, of course?
Super difficult. And, I think we're seeing that across the sector at the moment in lots of subjects where there's a squeeze, particularly in the areas in and around the options margins. If you're a core subject, you have a reasonably predictable number of people coming through year on year. You know your syllabus, you know your specifications. It's much more variable in the options world. And there are some places where geography is not taught as much because they don't have people choosing it. And it's a vicious circle of, if you don't have a great geography department shouting about how great they are, then why would you pick it, and so on. And I think we see that as a discipline. Geography is an incredibly popular options choice at GCSE, but with the narrowing of the curriculum at A level to 3 plus an EPQ maybe, rather than AS and A2, we see the increasing focus on STEM and the disciplines there. And I think we narrow the discipline a lot at A level, we narrow it even further at undergraduate level. And so it's a real challenge. How do you recruit if the pipeline to geography at university isn't as strong as you'd like it to be?
Yeah, and I suppose it's interesting too, because geography, like other subjects, particularly in the arts and humanities in recent years, have been re-evaluating what they mean by the geography that they teach and the people that they represent within the discipline. Your chapter on Whose Geography, I think, very concisely offers a nice snapshot of current conversations on the national level about that sense of othering, inclusive curriculum and representation in terms of the selection and presentation of curriculum content. How has the wider geography subject community engaged with those ways of thinking about the nature of the discipline, and particularly the need to offer a vision of geography that is inclusive for the students that we teach in the country as it currently stands?
Carefully, thoughtfully, and perhaps not quickly enough for everyone's liking. I think we have to acknowledge that as an academic discipline, so geography comes out at the turn of the 19th century as fundamentally a mechanism by which the academic disciplines are turning out servants of empire. The original purpose of academic geography was to generate great civil servants who could run the world. That's what it was for. And the first iterations of geography as an academic discipline are colonialist. They are cartographic. They are about resource allocation and how do we get the best out of this area we've divided up on a map. That's geography's original sin. And since then, I think the academic side of the discipline, universities have led the way on this, starting all the way back in the sort of 50s and 60s, looking at post-colonial geography and postmodern geography. It has taken more time than it could have to filter through to the secondary level. But I think the subject associations and the community have done incredible work over the last decade in looking at how we decolonize geography, how we encourage non-Western geographies, how we view indigenous knowledge, how we view the importance of multiple perspectives and multiple spaces, the idea of pluralistic views of the world and co-constructing that. This is all work that has been going on, but I think we would all acknowledge that the iteration and the evolution of that is filtered through specifications or curriculum models, or what will get you marks on an exam versus what won't. And often the most powerful examples of this geography are in the non-examined parts at Key Stage 3, where people are not necessarily so worried about teaching brilliant geography but it not getting recognised at a GCSE exam. It's only in the last 2 or 3 years that the major exam boards have shifted away from some reasonably contentious language and said, no, we don't expect you to call them slums anymore. That's a bit pejorative, actually. We should stop doing that. We want to use different language. And so I think the wheels of curriculum reform grind exceedingly slowly.
Yeah, the main topic I can think of that stands out to me that I remember studying as an A-level geography student and as GCSE geography student some time ago now, with David War's fantastic integrated approach textbook we used to lug around from room to room like a brick. It is the whole kind of topic of development and the perspective that geographers and apprentice geographers in the classroom are kind of encouraged to take in respect of how you describe what you see in the case studies, how you talk about the policy tools that are available to different agents within that particular region of the world. How is development now taught in the geography curriculum Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 as different from, say, when I did it about 30 years ago now?
I still have a copy of David War's book. It's brilliant. And it's one of those things where there are aspects of our discipline that if I picked up a copy of that textbook now, I could still teach from it. You know, the desert landscapes pictures and how a meander forms hasn't changed at all. But our understanding of topics like development have changed beyond all recognition. And I think the best teachers of this are sensitive to that change. They're not teaching the geography that they were taught. So I don't know if you've ever seen Hans Rosling's TED Talk about Gapminder, the data set, which then became a book about factfulness. And fundamentally, our bias is towards the way we see the world or the things that we view. So how do you approach that now? Better data, better sources. You're showing the world as it is, not the world of the textbook, because as soon as it's published in a textbook, it's out of date. You know, India will overtake China as the world's biggest country. Textbooks won't say that because they're too old. So you have to go to a different source. You have to do that in a different way. We have to be really careful about how we're telling other people's stories. In the book, I talk about that really inspirational phrase from what it was originally disability activism, and then has permeated through other activist groups about nothing about us without us. How do we represent people's stories in a way that they themselves would recognize if they were stood next to us in a classroom? We can't always do that. We can't always pop up and interview the person whose perspective we want. It's a really interesting thing. But how do we do our best to overcome that gap? How do we invest in high quality material, high quality case studies, high quality videos or data? And a lot of this is free. A lot of this is accessible, but you've just got to start looking for it and be mindful of knowing how to look for it. Margaret Roberts has in the second edition of Geography Through Inquiry has got some brilliant stuff on this. And the GA communities, Decolonising Geography Collective, Iram Samar, Catherine Owen, Kit Marie Rackley, they have been doing some incredible work in these spaces. And it's just a case of being prepared to do the work, being prepared to say, my perspective of that's okay is not good enough. I have to actively counter those biases. I have to actively examine my curriculum and go out and see, how am I presenting gender norms or family norms or economic norms or racial norms or ethnic norms or popular culture norms. How am I doing that? And is that okay? If someone else from that community was stood in my classroom, would they recognize that? Would they be okay with what I was saying here? And that's super hard. And
I suppose it also brings up that question, which is always kind of lurking in the background, really, with geography, which is, where do the non-geography specialist teachers who are teaching a geography curriculum in their secondary school go for that guaranteed quality assured insight that will then take them through the gate towards those high quality resources that you mentioned?
I think there's 2 or 3 answers to that, depending on who you are and where you are and the structures around you. For some, there are some absolutely incredible trust leads working in multi-academy trusts who are designing and thinking and being very provocative in their curricula that they are designing and supporting subject leaders to have in trust schools. There are some incredibly brilliant people doing that work, some of whom have written in the book. Abdurrahman Perez, for example, Kate Stockings. There are some incredible thinkers who are shaping their curricula for many, many schools. There are some really high quality resources available through things like Oak National. Graham Schofield and the team have worked with the Geographical Association to do some incredible work there. But then go to the big players for the most up-to-date things. Go to the subject associations, go to the Geographical Association, the Royal Geographical Society. Look at the resources and the courses and the material they're sharing. That's what the subject associations are so brilliant at for us. To tie it to an exam specification, you can use exam specification and resources, and the subject leads are brilliant. But as soon as they publish a textbook, it's out of date. And of course, the cost benefit of textbooks these days means you're not going to buy a new set every year. They're not going to publish a new set every year. And so increasingly, I think we're seeing a lot of people focusing on the resources they can deliver in their classrooms and worksheets or booklets or whatever that might be. But yeah, going to the people who are doing the work and saying, what are the resources you recommend?
And it's worth mentioning too, of course, that in your book, you've got quite a comprehensive list of digital resources to guide anyone who's looking to teach the subject. Did you want to say anything about those in particular?
Only that as soon as they're published, they might be out of date. So please be kind. And if you spot errors or things, then please let us know. But we can change the online material a lot easier than we can change some of the published stuff, which is why Hachette and I and my brilliant editors decided that we wanted to put some of that online as resources that could be updated and edited. Only in the last couple of weeks, for example, we've seen the US government decide to take the CIA World Factbook, which we've been relying on for generations for precise individual data about countries and their economic things. It's now offline.
Wow.
Doesn't exist anymore. And you know, that's like the last 2 weeks. So
it's actually run out of facts.
Yeah.
Yeah, so fast changing. I mean, particularly anything to do with NATO and the UN and all of that kind of stuff at the moment is in quite a considerable state of flux. Just got a comment here from Sarah Larson who says, Dr. David Preece, really enjoying your dissection of our incredible subject. Congratulations on the book too. And if you're listening and watching along and have some questions for David, then feel free to send them our way and we'll put them to David in the second half of the show. So we've talked about what geography is. We've talked about how it functions in the secondary school and its kind of uniqueness as a discipline within the secondary curriculum, David. I wonder if we might spend a little bit of time now going back through some of my thoughts about what I associated most with the best bits of geography as a student, which was, in my particular part of the world, getting out onto Dartmoor, getting out onto the East Devon coast and measuring things, being out in nature and experiencing the world in all of its glory and sometimes some of its wetness. In your chapter on taking geography outside the classroom, David, you draw a distinction between fieldwork and field trips. How should non-specialists like me understand these terms? And what implications do these have for the role that geography-related activities beyond the classroom play in shaping students' understanding of the subject?
It's a brilliant question. And I think what it sits at the heart of is the intersection of the Venn diagram between any subject and their contribution to the whole child, to building a human being who has really lovely experiences, has constructed some meaning and memories, has grown as a person. And the knowledge and skills and disciplinary context that they have gained that is subject specific. And for us as geographers, field work is how we do geography. It is rigorous, it is methodical, it is semi-scientific, it is structured, it comes with questions that we go and answer and a meaning and an interpretation that we go and construct afterwards. Field trips are a contribution that geography and many other subjects, let's be honest, can make to the whole child and their experience of the world. It's about awe, it's about wonder, it's about taking people outside of their comfort zone or giving them experiences that they hadn't had before or that they didn't know they were going to enjoy, or teaching them something about themselves. And I think the difficulty is that we sometimes blur the lines between those two. We think that, or it can be perceived that you're just going out on a jolly, rather than actually we're going and doing some really important work here. This is we have to do this. At GCSE, schools have to complete a human geography and a physical geography fieldwork in order to be eligible to sit the GCSE. And the head teacher or the centre manager of each school has to certify that all students have been given that opportunity at GCSE. At A level, the non-examined assessment for people in specifications that do it is a significant component of the course. And at undergraduate level, as a geographer, you write a dissertation between your second and third year where you go off and investigate something for yourself, and it contributes up to 25% of your final degree grade. It's who we are, it's how we do our subject. I don't have to go on a nice holiday to Iceland. I don't have to take you up Snowdonia and get you wet on Dartmoor, but I do have to teach you how to go and experiment and understand the world and come back and make some meaning from it. And that's the difference between field work and a field trip, I think.
Fantastic. So if field work is so important to the subject, and I think it is, I think it's crucial to how you collect evidence, how you analyze the evidence, and then how you present the evidence afterwards, then what constitutes great field work for you in practice then, David?
I think it's about recognizing that there are skills involved, there are decisions to be made, and that ultimately we want students to build up to a point where they can independently or semi-independently figure out a way to pose a question about a place or a problem, design an appropriate methodology to go and find out more about it, and come back and construct some answers for themselves. And at the A level end of that, you should have very little guidance. We should be able to say, what's your problem? What do you think is important to solve? How are you going to go and fix it? How are you going to go and fix it? Sorry. How are you going to go and investigate it? At Key Stage 3, we might say, we're going to tell you what the problem is. Should we build a cinema in the high street? And if so, where? And then we're going to give you a selection of 2 or 3 methods that we're going to help you go and do. And then you're going to come back and you're going to write that up, and you're going to make the decision about whether you think we should or shouldn't based on the questionnaires you've done or the site mapping you've done. So it's not just about the skills of fieldwork. It's not just about the methodology and the techniques and the components. It's also about recognizing that fieldwork is a journey, that you start in primary school investigating your local area and kind of making questions and asking questions. And by the end of wherever you reach at your journey, you should be more comfortable and more competent at being able to come up with a way that you're going to get those answers. It's a curriculum of skills. It's a process. My first head of department was a wonderful guy called JJ Snelling, now head of department up in Bromsgrove. And he believed that fieldwork was the vehicle by which we taught people how to find their place in the world. And he had a 7-year curriculum plan from year 7 to A level of, by the end, by the point where we take our year 13s on their final field trip exercise, this is the kind of person we want to take out. This is the kind of young person that we want to be able to take out into the world. And this is how we want to be able to engage them to engage with that world. Unfortunately, and I think Mark's report in 2023 on getting our bearings from Ofsted suggests that that's rare. That fieldwork is often done piecemeal, and that serves local needs, and the idea of a fieldwork progression model or a curriculum or getting better at fieldwork over time is not as common as we want it to be.
Yeah, I wonder if there's a tension between the need to spiral around those skills and the need to develop some kind of linear progress towards something higher. Do you see that happening in schools?
I do, and I think there's also the simple, the idea of skill fade. You know, how many schools would leave it a whole year between giving someone an essay, giving someone a mark back, and then doing it again? You wouldn't. Of course you wouldn't. If you want to be getting good at doing essays, you've got to do them regularly and often and have regular feedback and intervals. But field work is maybe once a year at best for most people. And it's in this topic over here. You might do coasts in year 7, or you might go out into your local high street in year 8. And it's often difficult for students to draw the line between how we did fieldwork then and how we do fieldwork here. And it's conceptually more challenging and practically more challenging. And I think schools are facing very real challenges to get people out of the classroom in whatever form.
How do you feel then about the concept of virtual fieldwork, and how does that fit into designing a meaningful geography curriculum?
Well, I think there are real strengths and real positives for it. It can't replace real fieldwork, and that's not what it should be doing. But it offers some really key components. First of all, you can do it on a really small scale and integrate it into lessons really easily. You don't have to take the students out for an entire afternoon, or miss period 5, or get them in early, or have them wearing special clothes. You can do it as a 20-minute exercise in your lesson and do work then and there and embed it systematically into your curriculum. That means it's easier to sustain and build skills. You can do it 2 or 3 times in a half term. You don't have to do one fieldwork exercise in that year. That's it, one and done. It also gives you the opportunity to explore our environments you wouldn't easily be able to access. Doing glacial fieldwork is difficult, and in almost any part of the country is going to involve a significant amount of travel and therefore coach cost. You do it virtually, you can travel to Mont Blanc that morning and back by the end of by the time the bell rings. River fieldwork is a lot safer when the river you can't fall into it because it's on a screen. Alistair Hamill has done some incredible work where his teams are doing virtual fieldwork into the mantle and using seismic tomography to explore plate boundaries. And that's not possible for anyone to do because we just physically can't do it and get down that deep into the earth. So it offers scope for incredible adventures and incredible things, and it costs nothing. And that, I think, is the big lever for schools right now because fieldwork is so expensive.
Yeah, I suppose it can also help with inclusion challenges as well, can't it? So if you've got a group of disabled students that you can't take out physically, they can still go and explore these fantastic, wonderful places that the world has to offer.
And increasingly, when we are seeing students with rising levels of anxiety or eco-anxiety, we're seeing students who are concerned about traveling or perhaps less comfortable with being away in residential or outdoors experiences. This can offer a really reassuring space for those students to feel like they belong to geography too, that you don't have to be roughy tufty outdoorsy man to be a geographer. You can be a little bit uncomfortable and a little bit awkward, and that's still okay. You are still part of geography too. I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, it's interesting you raised that idea of the residential, because quite often in secondary schools, the field work for the geography trip and the residential seem to go hand in hand. And yet they're two very different learning experiences, really, from being out measuring river flow velocity or measuring stone roundness on a beach to then going back to the youth hostel afterwards and getting on with the people you've been thrown together in a bunkhouse with that you don't normally spend much time with outside the classroom. How do you see those two aspects balancing in that whole kind of geography curriculum, particularly lower down the school as children are building friendships and learning those social skills while also learning the teamwork study skills?
But this comes back to that conversation of the difference between field trips and field work, and not everyone always knows that. I have been incredibly lucky in a number of schools to work for geographers as head teachers who instinctively got it. I didn't need to explain that I needed to go and do some serious work, and if they wanted year 8 to go on a camping adventure, they could do it, but please, let's not take it out of my budget and call it my geography trip. They are brilliant adventures, and they are really important parts of a child's development as the whole person, but it's not the same. And I think schools are under so much financial pressure that if you can save money by putting two things together and only paying for one set of coaches, or if you can save some money or save some time out of lessons and only disturb the wider school running once, then you might take that option. And sometimes, as a geography teacher and a purist, I have to accept that sometimes we have to do the right thing for the whole child at the detriment of my subject. I might not get the perfect geography experience. I might not get the perfect field work, because it's more important that those kids get an experience out of school in that way. And if that means compromising my perfect principles, then okay, so be it. That's the right thing for those students. So,
yeah, the greater good, perhaps, coming in there. And we've just had a comment from Sarah Larson again, who says, agreed about virtual fieldwork. I begin most of my lessons with a trip to an example of what we are studying on Google Earth. It really allows for increasing a sense of awe and wonder, along with rich geographical discussions prior to the input of new content. And you mentioned this concept of awe and wonder in your book, David. I wondered if you had any thoughts on Sarah's comment.
Well, I think what we would have seen, if you think back to the time when you were in your classroom with your textbook from war, and then you were going out to Dartmoor, I can almost guarantee that you would have had a world map in your geography classrooms. Everyone would have had one. And what we are seeing is that idea of using technology now to anchor a sense of place in a different way. Instead of going to the world map in the classroom and going, we are studying this here today. Look, children, here it is on the map. We're now using Google Earth, like Sarah suggested, to say, okay, here we are. Let's zoom into this place. Let's scroll out. Let's play with it a bit. Let's maybe drop into Street Mapper. Let's use these tools to build that sense of place. And as soon as we're building a sense of place that's different to our own, we're creating curiosity. We're creating a sense of, but what about what here? Oh, wow. And in some cases, we're creating a real sense of awe or wonder or difference, or my goodness, I've never seen a glacial valley. My goodness, look at this mountain. Look at the size of this lake. Look at the size of this physical feature. Look at the scale of this city. Oh my good. Can you imagine living in an apartment block this densely populated? And the truth is, we have these incredible tools. Google Earth is transformative in a geography classroom. I guarantee that, given that, you know, a tool that 20 years ago would have been classified, that gives you access to almost every place in the world in a level that no one else has done, and leave students in a computer room on their own, the two places they will look up first are the school or their house. But we have the ability to explore the world virtually much more than we ever did before. And I think what Sarah's suggesting is that just that use of technology to anchor place, but also to start telling a story. What are the people who live here? What's their life like? And how do we know that?
Yeah, it even seems to make inaccessible islands accessible, which is
Yeah.
quite something, isn't it? And I suppose then, if we're moving from this idea of tools that we've got at our disposal in the modern classroom, I suppose I need to ask the question really, how do we plan for great geography lessons with all of the range of tools that we've now got available to us, technological, printed? What is it that we're looking to do when we're teaching good geography lessons?
I think it's finding a balance that serves the needs of your students in your community. It's having an idea of who these people are, what stories they can tell, and what stories you'd like them to be able to tell by the time that they've finished with their geography education. We're an option subject. We don't guarantee that everyone stays to the final page with us. Some people will do 3 chapters, some people will do 5, some people will do 7. What stories do we want them to be able to tell about themselves? What stories do we want them to have heard about the world? Who do we want these people to be? What's our vision for geography? And that is hugely personal, and that's hugely contextual. There are some people in inner city London schools who deliberately will start with the local and the urban, and we have to know ourselves before we can go and explore the world. And there'll be some people who start in a completely different space. Let's look at a completely different environment that none of us are familiar with, and how do we apply some lessons from that to who we are and how we see the world. So I think you've got to have a vision for how you want your students to see the world, and figure out a way backwards from that. What do you want to take them through? What's the journey? What's the waypoint? What big decisions, what features of your school and the terrain that you are constructing, what do you want to be able to play with? So you'll have some people, for example, who will decide that they will do a spiral curriculum where they will grow in scale, but they'll repeat and come back to the same topics. You'll have people who'll say, it's too many topics. There's a rich diversity out there. I don't want my students to do rivers in year 8 and then again in year 10 and then again in year 12. And neither of those are better or worse. They're just different for the students in that place.
I suppose if we're thinking about it from the teacher's perspective now, particularly for perhaps beginning teachers in the discipline, where in your view is teacher subject knowledge and pedagogical practice tested most profoundly in the geography curriculum? Is it GCSE? Is it A-level? Is it lower down the school?
I think it's different for different teachers. I think lower down the school is the most flexible and the most free, in the sense that you are not constrained by a specification. You can go where you or your subject, your department or your trust want to go. I think the biggest challenge for GCSE is time and compression. There's a lot of content in a reasonably short space of time. And I think we've seen some schools offering the spiral curriculum where they're kind of expecting the bulk of that delivery to have happened maybe lower down in Key Stage 3. We've sort of moved away from the widespread adoption of a 3-year Key Stage 4 and a 2-year Key Stage 3. That's kind of fallen out of favour a little bit. And I think pedagogically, the big challenge of GCSE is the finessing of delivery to hit the marks in an exam under time conditions. You kind of have to accept that you might not teach the best geography, but you have to teach it in the way that will get the most marks over the course of a breadth of topics. I think at A level, it's a different challenge. You are teaching in depth. You have a bit more time and a bit more looseness to play with. You talked about, the global structures of governance changing around us. If you are teaching global systems of governance at this point in time, your lessons are incredible because you're just talking about how it's changing and how we're watching what we thought we knew come apart. And that requires a deeper and more flexible subject knowledge, but you're less pressured to fit it all in and hit the marks because the A-level essays are more open, and students who construct a good answer will be rewarded for great geography. It's also a bit more common, I think, at A-level to see a split in how the subject is delivered. So you might have one teacher specialising in one side of the course and one teacher specialising in the other. In my career, I mostly taught physical geography at A-level and didn't teach as much human geography. You don't get that at GCSE. You tend to have to do all of it. So it kind of depends on who you are, right? If you're a subject specialist, you might love the idea of going back to your international relations degree and touching on some of that with your A-level geographers and having those challenges. If you're a non-subject specialist, you might find that a bit more difficult. So who are you and what are you bringing from your lived experience will determine that, I think.
And how have the Geographical Society and others responded to the views of the curriculum and assessment review authors on what secondary geography might look like in the next decade? Because it's not going to stand still.
It doesn't stand still in the last 2 weeks, let alone the next decade. So both the GA and the RGS were heavily involved in submissions and evidence submissions for the curriculum and assessment report and the Francis Review in the first place. I was a trustee of the RGS at the time and involved in the education committee, and we were drafting some of that. I know the GA were really heavily involved too. Steve Brace and the GA are involved as curriculum writers and designers for the revised national curriculum, and will be working with specifications and exam boards and components. Mark Enser's just brought out a new series of textbooks, which will be brilliant. And I think, watch this space. It's a lively conversation. The subject associations have an incredible power of convening some people to talk about it and flesh out the issues. And I think we will see how the landscape emerges, what the government actually decides to adopt versus what the review has recommended, and how that plays out over time. But I'm confident that they will be involved in thinking about it as deeply as they can and drawing on the experience of the incredible volunteers and members that make up both organisations.
Thank you. And finally, I suppose, David, how is the government getting on with recruiting specialist geography teachers?
Well, it's an interesting landscape. We had an excellent year across the country last year, and in response to that, the DfE have moved the bursary amounts. It was 28,000 last year, it's 5,000 this year. Anecdotally, I think recruitment is lower, unsurprisingly. And I think the other component of DfE funding is that there is no subject knowledge enhancement course available in geography. Both RGS and GA offer their own, but they're not funded or supported by the DfE in the same way. So I think it's difficult. I think we are seeing an increasing rise in school-based teacher training or ITT being done outside of that PGCE framework. Certainly salaried teacher routes will probably be different across different subjects depending on what the PGCE bursary is. And I think what we're seeing increasingly is trusts and subject leads and spaces working really hard to support people in schools and doing a great job of doing it. But I don't think it's as easy as we'd like it to be. And in part, we're a victim of our own success. We have marketed over the last 10 years that geography is an incredibly employable degree, that you can go off and contribute to green economy and you can solve major challenges. And unsurprisingly, a number of really excellent geography graduates have done exactly that. And so now the pipeline into teaching is like, well, where are all these brilliant geographers? Well, they've gone off and done the brilliant geography that we said that they should do, and that's why we told them to go and do geography in the first place, and they have, which is brilliant for the planet and for us and society. It's a bit tricky for the next generation of geography teachers, but we're working on it.
Well, listen, David, I've really enjoyed talking to you tonight about your fantastic book, Secondary Geography in Action, and here is my copy here. I've enjoyed reading it immensely as a non-specialist, looking back to the days that I spent sitting learning geography with some really fantastic teachers, actually, particularly in secondary school and in my FE college. So thank you very much indeed for your time tonight. Shall we close by just you suggesting how our viewers and listeners might get hold of your excellent book, David?
I think it's available in, I've always wanted to say that, it's available in all good bookstores. It's also available wherever you buy your books, and Hachette Learning have it on their website as well.
Thank you. Well, it's been a thoroughly informative and enjoyable show this evening, David. Thank you very much for your time in what is an incredibly busy geography career. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. And thank you very much to everyone for tuning in. Please join us and keep your eyes open for any future Teachers Talk Radio publication specials. That's it from me. Thank you again to David. Thank you again for listening, and we will speak again soon. Goodbye.
Outstanding and world-class vision and world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused